Hello and welcome to the last episode of Mastering Dungeons of 2022. I am Shawn Merwin, as always, here with my flump-loving friend Teos Abadia.
Look
Hey
what I've
Teos,
got.
show off the good. Yeah, he is wearing the Be a Hero, Play D&D Flumph Pirate T-shirt. So what better way to end 2022 than that?
It's what's giving me power today, Shawn. I'm drawing all the power from Flapjack the Flump being on my
Yeah,
T-shirt. It's like an S on my chest. I just feel
that's
bulletproof right now.
good. Bulletproof, except for the kryptonite of what's a kryptonite for a flump?
I think
I'm
it was
not
owl
sure.
bears.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would
hmm
make sense. Well, we are ready to see 2022 out and ring in 2023. So we will go first to our Tootbag Patreon missive to take a comment from YouTube. So we're going to have to add that to the title of this.
yeah.
And it's Kurtugal4576 on YouTube,
I
noting the
knew.
following.
I knew a
Years
Kurtugal.
ago, oh,
I was
four
gonna say
five
I knew a
seven six.
Kurtugal 4576 when I was
Maybe,
in college. They.
yeah, maybe they're related.
Yeah.
Uh, Years ago, my players were complaining that although they had made specialist spellcaster characters, they still felt that certain spells in the game were so good that they made the players' choices feel bad or suboptimal. When WotC made the choice to make iconic spells like Spiritual Weapon, Magic Missile, and Fireball so good, they were underserving all other choices. Now that the player base is hungry for meaningful variety and power gamers are growing tired of the same builds, a more balanced reset would be helpful. There's lots of interesting food for thought in terms of game design of D&D
Yeah.
as a game, D&D as a hobby in there, but I'm going to let Teos go first.
Well, this is kind of a topic we haven't really explored, and it's fascinating. I love this question. Do you want all spells to be the same in terms of their power level? Do you want iconic spells to remain iconic? Like, do you want that wizards always cast Magic Missile because that's such an iconic part of the game? Is balance more important than that? Do you want imbalances so that when players are reading through the book, they go, ha, Fireball is actually better. It does more damage. I'm going to go with Fireball and feel really smart for having made that choice, which to the designer was actually obvious, and that's why he put it there. Like, that these are great questions. What do you think, Shawn?
I think this is one of the big paradoxes of D&D, right? Because it is a game machine, and as a machine, it suffers a bit when there is a great imbalance. But as a hobby, there is, let's call it a not insignificant segment of the audience that craves this imbalance, because this imbalance lets them do what's fun for them, which is find the optimal solution to a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you play into that? Do you serve that segment of the audience and allow this imbalance in the game, and lose them as fans and players of the game? Or do you make a perfectly balanced game which may serve the players as a whole better, but you lose out on this segment of people for whom problem solving and this optimization is a big part of the hobby for them?
Yeah.
And there is no right answer. But you know what helps in situations like this is, as a designer, being able to play with a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
people. As a company, doing market research to find out how big that population of optimizers is, and is it better to serve them, or is it better to make a game that is very balanced?
Yeah.
And this, you can look back at 4E and say that was a much more balanced
Mm-hmm.
game overall than any of the other editions, including 5th edition, was. And you can say, well, 4E didn't do as well as the other ones, so therefore people don't want that. Whereas there could be a million other reasons why 4th
Mm-hmm.
edition didn't do as well as, at least on the surface didn't do as well as the other editions
Right.
that had nothing to do with the balance. But you could, you could do that. I forgot the Latin term for it, but it's after this, therefore, because of this.
Uh-huh.
Right. False attribution of a reason why
Right.
something
Right.
happened. So right, all of this is part and parcel to designing a game, but then having the marketing of the game be very important, and the past of the game and the nostalgia of a game be very important to what actually goes into the game that you're making.
Yeah, I think I rather like where 5e strikes a balance in that it's not too balanced, and that does make it interesting, and I think it does reward some of the iconic things. And I think there was even designers that said, like, we made Fireball a little bit better, right? We made the dragons better.
Mhm,
And so they hit hard for their dragon hits hard for its CR. Like, that's just because they're cooler, it's in the name.
mhm,
Um and that's probably okay, and overall a good thing for the game. But it's interesting, and you don't want to abuse it too much. And we do see a little bit of that, to where, like, cleric spell lists tend to be pretty similar across clerics, and that's true of other classes as well, because it's like, well, yeah, that's the best thing. Spirit guardians, right? It's delicious, let's go with it, right? And yeah.
mhm. If you go back to first edition, where especially at lower levels, and you had to memorize spells rather than having spell slots, you would memorize those spells that you thought you would need for that day. And then generally what would happen is you would realize that the spell you took wasn't the optimal spell, or was completely useless in the situation
Right.
that you were in. And it would have been so much better if you had friends instead of magic missile.
Right.
And as the editions evolved, mechanics were changed to allow you to have more spell slots, or get spell slots on the fly. If you're a cleric, if you're third edition, right, you could get rid of a spell slot and change it out for a healing spell. So you didn't have to memorize all
Yeah.
healing spells. And so it gave the player sort of more power, more autonomy. But then by doing that, it's like it's never enough. We want to be even more ready for any situation. And so the further along that path you go, the more you are requiring or inviting people to be optimal. And do we need to be optimal all the time in this game to make the game fun? And some people will say yes. I think a majority of us would say no. There, you can have fun in this game without
Yeah.
having the most optimal character in every situation.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's interesting is to see, as the game adds new source books, you end up a little bit like the Magic the Gathering problem, where it's like, either a card is better than an existing card, or it's worthless. Right? Other than its
Mhm.
rarity
Right.
and maybe some art, whatever that gives it some value. But if a set comes out and no card is worth putting into your deck to replace another one, then people are disappointed, right? And D&D can get to the point where the only thing that's going to be stronger is silvery barbs. And and we see what that
Mhm.
causes, right? When you get a new, like, oh, this is obviously better, right? Healing spring, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And everybody just goes, oh, we will all now take this because it's so clearly better. And
Mhm.
that's a very hard design balance issue, right? You don't want to introduce something that becomes the new obvious on every single spell list. And obviously we can see even very good game designers make those
Except if you
mistakes.
do.
Except if you do.
Right. Except if you do. Right. If you do want people to buy the new book, buy the new stuff, you do make it more powerful, at least for those people who are going to buy every book and
Mhm.
scour it for the better option. So, right,
Well,
it's
yeah, and then
you
you get
could look at
into,
it from so many different ways.
should there be errata, right? And that was a fascinating thing with fourth edition, that fourth edition wanted to be the edition that just said, look, your DM makes the call. Don't worry about it. We don't have to fix anything.
Mhm.
You get to fix it at your table. And
Right.
then there are things like organized play, or just any number of things. Because fourth edition had enough, sort of loops of things that people were trying to do, that if you broke that loop, suddenly your whole character build didn't work, right? And so people had a
Mhm.
lot of
Right.
invested
Right.
emotional angle to, I must be able to do my thing. This is my thing. And if someone goes like, well, actually, that's not how, your warlock rod works, then all of it fell apart and people got mad.
Right.
And Wizards went from no errata to unbelievable amounts of errata for 4th edition, kind of overreacting to that. And then, so we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. And you brought up another topic that feeds into this, which is, DMs can and should be able to control their own games. And right, the nature of the game is that the DM has to have at least some sort of agency to be able to fix problems on the fly if they see one in their game. And yes, for every few DMs that do this well, there is definitely a DM who might have some sort of power issues and want to punish players, and that's a whole thing too. And the rules, in some ways can insulate players from that, but if you have that problem, there's no amount of rules that are going to insulate you from it.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's better to have DMs, train DMs, to run games that are fun for the players that are at their tables.
And that's always a good question. We can look at it today when we talk about chapter 9. To what extent is the book saying to the DM, hey, you get to control this stuff, right? Is that happening, or is it just sort of, here are the rules? Because the more that it's taught as rules, the more that the DM feels they can't change things and that they don't have a say in it, right? And you really have to tell people that it's okay.
Right. And tell people, if you do change these rules, this is what's going to happen in this machine that we've presented to you. You're going to switch out these 2 cogs. Well, this might be the result of you switching out these cogs, so be cognizant of that. See, cog and cognizant. I did a little wordplay there.
I liked it. That was good.
I'm on today. Well, as Teos mentioned, we are going to talk about chapter 9 today of the Player's Handbook for 5e, which talks all about combat. But first, we're going to get into our news and commentary section. And we're going to start with some sad news. We all learned that Kim Mohan passed away last week. Kim was an amazing editor, one of the few people to successfully make the transition from TSR into Wizards of the Coast. He was hired by TSR in 1979 after a brief career as a newspaper writer and editor. And he retired from Wizards of the Coast in 2013. So that's 14 years with a small stint of working for Gary Gygax's New Infinities company before going back to TSR. But he was one of the few people that contributed to official products for all 5 editions of AD&D and then D&D.
Amazing.
He was perhaps best known as the longtime editor and Dungeon and Dragon magazines. He was a lead editor and a managing editor at Wizards of the Coast and contributed to countless D&D products and game systems over the years. The tributes that people gave to Kim were voluminous and heartfelt, you could tell on social media, and they really drive home the influence that he had on what the game was, from its inception back in in the 1970s to what it is right now, and then to what it will be going forward with his stewardship of the editing there.
Yeah, really sad to hear. I always think about Kim from a time that when we worked on DDI articles, and he sent an email prior to Gen Con and said, if any of you are going to be, and he said to anybody who had contributed to the D&D Insider articles for Dungeon and Dragon magazines during 4th edition, and he said, I'm going to be at Gen Con. If you want to meet up for coffee and bring a piece of your work and have me go over it, or a previous article, look at why we made certain edits, something that you're working on, whatever. And I took him up on it, as many other my friends did, and it was amazing that he would just give you this time to, out of the kindness of his heart. I don't know how many people he met with that weekend, but he met with a bunch of people to just spend, a half hour, and gave me a lot of really good feedback on a piece that I had written that had then been rejected, and sort of talking through the whys and maybes and what to do. And that was really great. And that I think speaks to the kind of it's a window into the kind of person he was, and how he touched so many people, and that's all we can kind of hope for in this hobby, is to have that kind of effect on people like Kim did. So really one of the greats, incredible what he accomplished, but just also what a person he was, right? That's great.
Yeah. And another thing he brought, other than that kindness, which I took him up on as well, was the style of D&D writing. Him coming from the newspaper industry,
Mm.
where it's clear, concise, to the point. Some of the earlier stuff that we saw from D&D was sort of verbose and did not work well as a game manual, as opposed to prose or right poetry in some
Yeah.
cases, or this other. And so his stewardship brought this idea that you want this writing to be clear, concise, get across the point, because it's not prose or poetry, it's a game manual.
Yeah.
So right, that sort of writing, that clear writing that we need in games, we can thank Kim for a
Hmm.
lot of that over the years. We have more news about DMsGuild because its content is coming to Roll20 in February of 2023. Teos, I'm going to let you cover this.
All right, yeah. So in February, you're going to be able to sell the Roll20 content you have created via the DM's Guild. So what will happen is things like, adventures that you've written, art packs, token sets, whatever that you have on the DM's Guild, you can now, when someone buys it on the DM's Guild, it can be unlocked on the VTT as well. To do that, you need a Roll20 partner account and you need a DM's Guild creator account. So if you don't have one of those, go get the one you don't have so that you're set up there. We've got a link in our show notes to different articles about this topic that include a link to where you sign up for your partner account. It's a fairly innocuous process. Royalty splits will be honored in the same exact way, since the purchase takes place on the DM's Guild. So it all feels like a DM's Guild purchase. Royalty splits if you have several people involved in the project. All of that will be done through there. It's just that you're unlocking it on the VTT. And in January, we can expect further guidelines, and then in February is when the sales can begin. So, being December, start planning now, thinking through what you might want to have on that platform, and then in January you'll have the info you need to use your account. Cool.
Wow, that is not something I was aware of, and that is of great interest to me, with a lot of stuff on the DMs Guild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Going from the DM's Guild to the D&D cartoon, that D&D cartoon that we all loved, for those of us who are pretty old, back in the 80s, is returning as a 4-part comic book. So IDW will have a 4-part miniseries featuring Dungeon Master, Hank, Sheila, Diana, Presto, Eric, Bobby, and Uni the Unicorn, as well as the evil Venger.
Yeah. March
It's called
2023.
Dungeons and Dragons. Yep, it's called Dungeons and Dragons Saturday Morning Adventures, and it will be releasing in March of 2023.
Pretty cool. I mean, what I really
We are
want
looking.
is
Oh,
a cartoon that
yeah.
is on TV. We keep on getting all sorts of other things. It's interesting because for a long time, many years, it was like D&D forgot this thing existed, right, or ignored that existed. And now there are all these indicators around it, right? The character art appears in the new starter set. There's this 4-part
Mhm.
series. It's like you're always doing something that isn't the one thing that I think a lot of us would like to see, which is a new D&D cartoon. But one day I can hope.
At the beginning of Pixar movies, when they have the short and then the Pixar movie, how cool would it be if there was a D&D cartoon in front of the D&D movie?
Oh, wow. That'd be amazing.
See, this is
Yeah.
why they should hire me to come up with these horrible ideas. I mean, wonderful
Wonderful.
ideas.
Whoa, what's
Yep. Speaking of
happening?
wonderful ideas, speaking of wonderful ideas,
Uh-huh.
um, are we going to see Arcadia in print? MCDM has a survey to ask you whether you want the Best of Arcadia compilation in print. The survey also asks, you covered it up. There you go. Survey also asked what type of offering and what articles you would want to include, and that is on their Patreon page. So you can go check it out there. Whether or not you are a current subscriber to Arcadia, you have that opportunity to make your voice heard.
Pretty cool.
And the final bit of news is an article by our friend DM David. And this is super fascinating to me. So fascinating that I want to hear Teos talk about it. It's on the swinginess of the D20.
Yes, his latest blog is all about how the D20 is, statistically speaking, a very swingy way to generate numbers in a game, right? Because you have just a single die, so it's an equal chance of 1 to 20. You know, there's a 5% chance of landing each one of those. 5 times 20, 100. And so because of that, what happens to the math of the game is that you can have a fairly large bonus when you're trying to do something, and you can still roll low and fail. And a novice character who has a very small bonus or no bonus at all, or even a penalty, could roll high and succeed, right? And if you've played D&D or D20 games, you've seen this. And then the question is, what do you do about that, right? And various editions have worked hard to balance this. So you can provide experts with such a large bonus that they always succeed. You know, third edition, I think I had a plus 43 to my track check or something like that with my ranger, so that you are never ever going to fail. But that requires real corner cases and spells and all sorts of stuff. And what ends up happening is if you provide experts with such a large bonus that they always succeed, game actually becomes a little boring for them and for the rest of the party. And the novice now has zero chance, right? If the DCs expect that this huge bonus is in play, then you end up with this on-off switch of who can do things. And so he breaks down in this blog what all these different options are and how to compare that to games that have used 3d6 or 2d10 or fudge dice, which have pluses and minuses, so you get a result between -4 to 4. And how they all do this differently, because by having multiple dice, you create a bell curve where you tend to get results in the middle of the dice, right? You're going to get few 1s and 6s on a d6, for example. You're going to get something in the middle, and you're going to get those kind of middle ranges. But so he breaks down kind of what are these options and why is it fun to have the d20 to be that swingy. He quotes also Wizards of the Coast people talking about that. So yeah, I really enjoyed that read. It was a nice way to think about that topic.
Yeah, it's in my class, I spend probably half of a 80-minute class talking specifically about this when we get into more advanced role-playing games like D&D and the other ones that David talks about. And it's super fascinating stuff that a lot of times even game designers, whether full-time, part-time, novice or expert, sometimes don't understand or even attempt to consider in their games. And this came up in a game that we are currently working on, or a supplement we are currently working on at Ghostfire Gaming for our Grim Hollow, where it's sort of a subsystem, and we began with a D20, but it's a subsystem where it's not a pure pass-fail thing. There's like degrees of success or degrees of failure, and you can use bonuses, or there might be penalties to persuade that roll, to change that roll. And we ended up switching to 2d10 rather than the d20 because we wanted to limit those. Right, you want to have the fun narrative of catastrophic failures or high arching successes, but you also don't want to have them happening all the time. And you want the bonuses to mean something more than just if I roll a 1, I've turned what's a terrible defeat into still a pretty bad defeat. So we switched to those 2d10 to sort of even that out. And that's just one of the things that I've used in my own game design to make the swinginess of that d20 a little less powerful.
Yeah, I did a design project where I was creating a bunch of tables, and one of the things I was looking at is one of the things I asked myself is, well, do I want an equal chance of everything in this table? And there are times when the answer should be yes, and there are times when you say, well, actually, it would be better if certain things happened more often because that matches the world, kind of works well. And so then looking at, okay, what dice should I use, right? how many entries do I want on this table, and what kind of a spread do I want? And then you start web searching, like what are the probabilities of all these different dice spreads and which one
Mhm.
looks right, and it's kind of hilarious to do that, but it really does shape the experience differently.
Mm,
Another thing I think of is
it does.
Gumshoe. I remember the first time I played a game of Gumshoe of Night's Black Agents, which uses a single D6. And the DM said that, or GM said that, and I thought to myself, oh, I'm not going to like this game. Just a single D6. But the way it
Mm,
works is your DC tends to be pretty low, but you have a number of points tied to sort of the equivalent of your skill points. And you can burn those points temporarily to add to your six. And so it becomes really easy math. And because the point of the game is to be awesome, you are a really cool Jason Bourne type
mhm,
spy, Mission Impossible type thing, then you can burn these points to auto succeed. But you can't do that forever. You can't succeed at everything. So you get to pick which
mm,
things you want to succeed at. And I mean, that is such a great system. And it's made possible because it's so simple with just a single die, a very narrow band of DCs, and then this benefit to boost to it. So
mm.
it's fascinating how game designers can
Yeah.
can play with that.
Yeah, yeah, and it all goes back to that question that you have to ask yourself at the start of any project that when you're building a game engine, which is how often do we expect the characters to succeed? How often do we expect them to fail? What are the consequences of success or failure in our game? And what control do we want to
Yeah.
give players and game masters over that narrative? And I'm sure DM David talks about all of that in his article. And we
That's
may,
great.
as we talk more about 5e and more about 1D&D, as more playtest packets come out, get back into that sort of questioning of what this game system should be.
Hmm. Yeah.